Okay. Okay, well, welcome everybody to the latest edition of the Parks and Natural Areas Roundtable. This is Glenn Laird from Harris County Flood Control District. I want to welcome all of you. Usually when we're actually sitting around a table, there's the deal where we all go around and say who you are and who you're with, but I have been told that 55 people have signed up for this thing. And so we will probably pass on that. As soon as you do actually get let in, you're going to be recorded as to your presence. And so that'll go in the minutes that you actually were here and participated. So we'll forego that for the time being and just say that we hope this is going to be a meeting where we get a lot accomplished, that we hear some very good information, and we have a chance to chat at the end of it and share. So I will just go right on into the next part of this thing, and that will be our presentations. And the very first one on tab will regard the House Bill 1410 in the most recent meeting of the Texas legislature and its possible ramifications. And Augie Campbell, the executive director of the Association of Water Board Directors, and Deborah January Beavers, who's the president and CEO of Houston Wilderness, are going to tag team this thing, I have been told, and I'm going to turn it over then to them.
Great. I'm trying to turn it over to Deborah, but she's still on mute. And
I'm sorry, you're right. I'm talking away and nobody can hear me. My bad. Anyway, I was just saying thank you very much, and I was just letting Augie know that I can be the scroller. So let me share my screen and get us going. I'm sorry. I don't know if somebody just said something.
Someone had a hot mic. That's okay.
Ah, the hot mic. Yes, that does happen. Let's see. There we go. All right, and let's get us back to the front. All right. So I'm Deborah January Beavers, president of Houston Wilderness. And I know Augie could introduce himself. I guess I'll let you do that here in just a second, Augie. We are excited to talk about HB 1410. And, you know, this reminds me a little bit of, I've enjoyed working and supporting and advocating laws in the Texas legislature for longer than I want to say, because it'll age me. But it's really fun. It's a little bit like New Year's. You know, on New Year's, the next week, you're like, okay, how long do I say Happy New Year before I stop saying Happy New Year, because it's the new year, right? It's a little bit like that with bills that become law. Eventually, it will not be HB 1410. It will just simply be a new law, which I'm excited about. But right now, it's still HB 1410, and that's really cool. I do seem extra giddy, and it's because it is so unusual for a bill to make its way through the entire legislative process its very first time being filed. And so it was such a pleasure to watch the bipartisan support and all the different entities that coalesce together to make this legislation a reality and what is now a new law. So anyway, I tend to get kind of extra giddy about it because it really is exciting that we got to watch from beginning to end the legislative process in one session. We got to watch bipartisanship, which was fun. We got an opportunity to talk about how important parks and green space are, not only to special districts, but to the community as a whole. So, and with real receptiveness on the part of the legislators, both on the House side as well as the Senate side, which was carried by Senator Creighton. So it was just, and HB 1410 was filed by Representative Jim Murphy. So the whole process was really a lot of fun. And I'm going to let Augie kind of kick it off with the next slide. But Augie, let me let you introduce yourself and maybe say a few words of your experience with this bill.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Deborah. And I'm really excited to be here with Deborah talking about this bill because our organizations and many other organizations worked hard together long before the session started. And, as usually happens, any piece of legislation that succeeds in one session, the idea has been around for a while. In fact, this was sort of an extension of a bill that passed in 2003 in a constitutional amendment. And so park and recreational bonds had been around since back then when, Joe B. Allen got with former judge, actually, I think it was before he was Judge Lindsay, when he was Senator John Lindsay, to pass that 1% Parks and Rec Parks bill.
Right.
And so really, this was just a kind of an admission that we had a great start and that there was room for a lot more work. And so, and this is part of a bigger effort. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about Deborah, is because there's a lot of context. I mean, if we were just trying to get these bonds from, just so we had money, that would be one thing. But there are a lot of uses for these bonds. And, we actually started out, in 2018 with an organization called Houston Stronger. Joe B. Allen was involved in that as well. I started that with him and Chris Lindsay, and we invited a lot of folks like Deborah to really get involved. And we were really lucky that we had, really a great cross section of organizations that created a basis of support. So whenever we have an idea like HB 1410, it's a light lift. I mean, because there are many hands involved in really thinking about the benefits of what Deborah's trying to work on a larger context. And so I think that's where I kind of want to step back. And before we get into the details of HB 1410, look at the regional conservation framework that Houston Wilderness and Deborah have developed. And then we'll talk about HB 1410 in the context of that framework.
Right. Oh, great. Thanks. So you all already know this. I always like to include it. We're a diverse region, not only in our people, in our different types of companies, but in our actual ecoregions. And so because of that, this creation, as many of you know on this call, of the 8-county Gulf Houston Regional Conservation Plan came together back in really toward the end of 2013. It's amazing. It's coming up on 10 years in a couple of years. It's hard to believe. But anyway, we recognize that really to enhance and protect and promote all these ecoregions, we need to do so in a way that not only makes sense from the perspective of large-scale land conservation, but then also from the perspective of resilience, because obviously we are, as Augie has alluded to, we're in a region that has a lot of extreme events and regular warming events, as well as sea level rise, and of course, regular numerous rain events.
And it can get cold here too, like we learned in February.
And now we know it can also freeze and we can all lose electricity for days on end. That's true. Very good point. So the Regional Conservation Plan, again, I may be speaking to this group that already pretty much knows this. I presented it to this group several years ago. But just as a quick reminder, there are 3 key goals in the Regional or Conservation Plan, or the RCP. The first one is to have up to 24% protected reserve land by 2040. We are going to be hot off the press in about a week announcing our annual update. We will be going from currently 14.7% protected reserve land to 15%. So not a huge jump this year, but a good bit. And so, we're eking our way up toward 24%. And so, what Houston Wilderness does as it relates to the Regional Conservation Plan, among other things, is we advocate for laws and opportunities for laws such as HB 1410, that help us provide that additional protected preserved land. The second key goal is to work toward 50% of the 8-county region, which is about a little less than 2.5 million acres, to have some kind of nature-based stabilization technique on it. So that's whether it's a forest or large-scale tree planting being put there, prairie areas, wetlands, installation of different nature-based stabilization techniques. 50%, we think that's very doable. There's a lot of that of our land already doing that, but there's a lot more that needs to be. We don't have a baseline for that. It would be very difficult to track, but we do track resiliency in that regard, and I'll talk about that. And actions that people are taking. And then lastly, which overlaps with the other two, is to work toward, and that's actually a misprint, that is 0.4% increase in carbon sequestration in our soils. And we know that we got very close to that this last year. We may have been off by just a fraction of a percentage. We did hit 0.04%. That'll be announced as part of our press release next week. And that happens through oyster reef creation, large-scale tree planting, native grasses installations, cover crops, that kind of thing. We also update annually, sometimes semi-annually, depending on our work schedule, the working list of projects. So this is every environmental-based project in the region in need of full or partial funding. We have a pretty established checklist now and group of partners that we work with to update this. The yellow are nature-based type restoration projects. The blue are land acquisition, conservation easement projects in need of funding. And the green are projects that have now been funded. So the neat thing is that we've been tracking all this since 2014. And so we've got a pretty good database now of what has come in, what's been funded. We can provide all this type of information to a variety of different entities for different reasons. But this, of course, is a protected preserved land piece. It's also a nature-based stabilization piece, and to some extent also somewhat of a calculation of carbon sequestration in our soils. So, it provides all kinds of different reasons why we want to track that data. Under the second key goal, these are some of the nature-based stabilization techniques. This group knows this pretty well. I don't have to go through a lot of that. I like to show examples of what protected preserved land is. That doesn't mean that it's got a conservation easement on it necessarily. It means that it's land that is expected to be preserved as green space for a long period of time. So whether it's Addison Barker Reservoir, Exploration Green, Chocolate Bay just recently had a true conservation easement put on it, 70 new detention basins, part of the flood control effort under their bond program. Those are all protected preserved land that we promote and encourage. So when we talk about tools in the resilience toolbox, this helps not only Houston Wilderness, and we provide one-pagers on each of the three goals and different tools in those resilient toolbox, but it also, I think, helps the general public think through, all right, how do we get to achieving those three goals? And really quite more generally, what are some of those tools in the resilience toolbox? I thought that the Texas legislature was very interested in hearing about these different tools in the resilience toolbox, because that really is what it takes. This group knows that. It's a package of, and for that matter, that's what Houston Stronger's plan attempts to really do, is to say, what is the package of resilience projects that are going to get us where we need to be to protect our residents and our companies, et cetera, going forward. And most, if not all of them, fall within those three goal areas, with a few exceptions. Obviously, they're gray infrastructure based, like the tunnel. That doesn't really fit into this goal, but it's certainly understood as part of the package of resilience tools. So these are some of them here. I won't go through a lot of them, but we recognize that HB 1410 and the idea of encouraging use of green space within these districts, whether they're old districts or newer districts, and Augie's going to talk a bit about that. They're an important aspect of adding protected preserved green space to our lands, and so or to our region. And so that was some of what we wanted to encourage. And then let's see, is this slide 10? I believe it is. And so this is, again, I just mentioned, is one of the ways we recognize was an important tool in that resilience toolbox for protected preserved land. Did you want to kind of pick up from here, Augie?
Yeah,
Am I on slide 10?
Right, and this is kind of where we get to transition. So I basically roped Deborah into this and said, by the way, can we steal your slideshow presentation, because she's done a great job. And really, I talked a little bit about being executive director of the Association of Water Board Directors in Texas. So we represent MUDs across the state, but most of our members are in the Houston region. They're in, I would say over 90% of our members are on the HGAC map. And so, it corresponds well to Deborah's regional conservation plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about where MUDs are and the geography and the limitations on parks and rec bonds. But we have seen many MUDs, both master plan communities, the new MUDs, and existing MUDs use parks and recreational bonds very effectively to implement this green, the resiliency toolbox. And you can see the distribution of MUDs across the state. And of course, I represent the Association of Water Board Directors. And so it's not just MUDs, it's also levee improvement districts, freshwater supply districts, and water control and improvement districts. And you can see the distribution of all these districts on our HGAC region. And so, that was from 2018. That, the numbers are a little bit behind. There are over 1,000 districts
that's true.
that fit in there. And I could have updated that. I didn't have it produced in a nice chart like that. Myers Research did a impact of Harvey study for AWBD. And I suggest, please go to our website and look at that. You can find a lot more information about MUDs and sort of how MUDs did during the storm, but that's not the focus of this presentation. One of the things that we do want to encourage is better use of and just more resilient infrastructure, green infrastructure. So basically MUDs and the rest of the community surrounding MUDs are able to withstand greater storms. In other words, hold more water on their land during a storm event without flooding anybody, and then having that water safely pass to the bay. And so that takes more land, and the best way to do it, we think, is not to line your bayous with concrete, because that just makes the water go faster. We need to slow the water down, and that's what green infrastructure really does. And so you can see that we have, all these tools. And so this is, elaborating on what Deborah touched on earlier, the resilience toolbox. We do have the 1410 bonds. We also have a lot of other flavors of bonds that work with not just the public side finance, but also private finance. And that's where, green bonds can come into play with that private component. We also have the Texas Flood Infrastructure Fund, which is something that we worked with Deborah and Houston Stronger on in 2019. That was Senate Bill 7. And that'll be supplemented by Senate Bill 8, which creates regional flood planning groups. And we've already seen a lot of these flood infrastructure fund dollars go out to counties, states, counties, cities, and MUDs, along with other special districts. There are a bunch of government buyout programs, and really those are, administered. Probably the most successful entity in administering those buyout programs is the Harris County Flood Control District. They're not the only ones, but they've done probably the most effective job in the nation with their program. We also have seen a lot of interaction with MUDs and the Flood Control District and the buyouts within MUDs. I think you've seen the Flood Control District buy out several golf courses, and those have been really productive areas to implement flood control programs. And they also provide a bunch of additional green space and park space. And again, you look at Memorial Park Conservancy, the Houston Parks Board. There are a lot of ways to partner between the public and private realm to really do some fantastic things. And we want to bring more of these ideas to special districts where there are opportunities with communities that can support them. So under Texas law, basically municipal utility districts and water districts can use Parks and Recreations bond, which 1410 addresses for a whole bunch of different things. And here we've listed them out. So you can get more forest space and green belts, open space and native habitat. You can put in sidewalks, trails, and these things are already going into communities, and frankly have been in a lot of really good communities for a while. What we think this really does is it allows communities to retrofit these in a way, especially if they don't have the value on the front end that a lot of your bigger developments do. So this really equalizes the playing field for smaller communities, and we'll give some examples of that later. So, but before we go on, Deborah, let me get a little bit more through. So basically, we have, Bear Creek is a great example of where you have, I mean, it is one of the biggest flood detention areas, and if you go down to Bear Creek Park in Addicks Reservoir, they've done a great job of putting outdoor ball fields in those parks. And you go to a lot of different muds and you'll see increasingly they'll take those flood detention areas and they'll make soccer fields or football fields that are used by the community. Also, we've seen a lot of amenity lakes, and amenity lakes are increasingly expensive. So you can also use these funds to retrofit your amenity lakes where they can carry less water and really provide more park space or other things that the community likes. I mean, amenity ponds look great, but they do cost a lot to maintain. And sometimes, you can go in there with another great use, like a splash pad or something that uses a lot less water and provides a lot of community benefit. You can also use it to produce non-air conditioned buildings out in the park, and those are obviously very beneficial. Also fences and landscaping. And that's one thing that's really underestimated. I think Deborah's done a great job of illustrating the value of putting better landscaping into communities. And so that's an additional cost. A lot of the times we've gone in with St. Augustine and we've put those grasses in and they look great, but they're really expensive because they take a lot of water and they cost a lot to maintain. You can go in and retrofit the landscape so you have less in the way of maintenance in the long run, and that actually will save your community money over time.
Right.
So if we go to the next slide, you can see this is sort of an example of what we're talking about. I mean, you do have an amenity lake, but it's paired with really good recreational facilities and native meadow, wetlands. And that's another thing too, for a lot of our communities, if we are going to facilitate growth, we either have to rebuild on the land we already have, or we have to do a lot of work on mitigation banks. And so really working on mitigation banks and thinking about wetlands in the context of the neighborhoods is actually much more cost effective than trying to build the world's largest mitigation bank, which I know, again, the flood control district's done a great job on mitigation banks. Also forestation. We do have, there are a lot of areas that were at one time forests, and they were cut to make way for rice fields. And so, I mean, it depends on where you go. The geography and the history of, I guess, plants in this area is really complex. And I suspect that there are people who probably know a lot more about it on this call than I do. But I will say that, working with great landscape architects, you can really do a lot to bring back in native species and really just hardy plants that will benefit your community at a lower long-term maintenance cost. Go to the next slide.
Yeah, Augie, can I just mention there is a link down there at the bottom of this slide, and this Dragonfly Park was obviously kind of built for the residents, but it is very accessible to the public. It's off of 99, so it's a little bit of a drive. You're not close to there, but it's really kind of worth seeing. It's a beautiful park that they've created. They being Howard Hughes and the Bridgeland staff, that is meant to be as natural as possible. And it's got water reuse. It's engineered, obviously for flood purposes, but it's native grasses. It's native trees, and anyway, it's really, I think, well done. Obviously a lot of other land was used to create the development, but they've really tried to incorporate, as Augie was saying, natural pieces back into it that are based on our native grasses and trees, not just St. Augustine. So that's all I was going to say.
Yeah, but I'm glad you stopped me there, and I'll point out that both the costs of parks in Bridgeland and Cross Creek Ranch exceed 1% and get closer to 3% of the total value of those communities. But there's a demand for it. And that's really what's interesting is, even though they're going above and beyond that cap, it's not as if they aren't selling the houses. So it says that, the consumers are certainly willing to pay more for this natural, green space benefit. And especially when it's well done and well thought through. And I agree. I mean, and Tricia Brasso, I got to give Tricia Brasso a whole lot of credit. She was extremely involved. She's with Howard Hughes. She did all the parks in Bridgeland and other places too. And she testified in Austin with us and has been a huge proponent of 1410 and nature-based infrastructure, especially in master plan communities. You can see, I mean, and Bridgeland and Howard Hughes, I mean, and Houston's really been a beneficiary of the competition between these large-scale developers to see who can put in the best nature-based infrastructure in their communities. And they're not the only ones, but they are certainly two top contenders and extremely competitive. Cross Creek Ranch, Deborah was talking about Purple Pipe in Bridgeland. They also have Purple Pipe and Cross Creek Ranch, and they use basically natural flow to treat their water coming out of the wastewater treatment plant. So they have a water polishing pond that's, kind of the first of its kind in Texas. And so again, using this nature-based infrastructure to provide not only a sort of wastewater treatment, stormwater benefit, but also a recreational benefit because it attracts so many bird species. And that's a real selling point for their community as well. And adding in all of this, kind of flora and fauna diversities worked out well for their community. Go to the next slide. You can see that, this is Houston, but Houston is not the only area that can use parks and recreations bonds. It's available in the, 4 major metro areas in Texas and their adjacent counties. So basically, those core counties, along with the main suburban counties, are all eligible to use those parks and recreations bonds. Now, getting to the nuts and bolts of 1410, like we said, this is not a completely new law. This is really an extension of the law that already existed from back in 2003. And so originally, when we drafted it up, there was not a cap on it. It was really it would have made it like any other type of bond. You have water and wastewater bonds and even road bonds. And basically there's a formula that the AG and TC use to determine basically the amount of bonding capacity that you have in those communities, as opposed to the taxable value formula, which they've used here. Long and the short of it is, basically, we had to cut a deal to get this all the way through. So we capped it at 3%. But what we found is that in most of the cases that, whether it was Howard Hughes or Johnson Development, or even Fort Bend Mud 23, which is in Fort Bend County, down near, it's kind of in between Pearland and Sugarland. It really basically, if they had 3 times the amount of capital, they should be able to complete their plan for their community. And a lot of the problem, Fort Bend County Mud had to go back every, 3 or 4 years and get a new bond issue, because that 1% cap was, just prohibitive on the way they wanted to put parks in their community. So they'd have to go and buy land through one bond issue and then sit on that land for 4 years, and then go back to their voters and pass another bond so they could put the trails in, and then they'd have to pass another bond to build other recreational facilities. So they basically went from having to pass 3 or 4 bonds to just having to pass 1. And that was sort of the case that Ellen Hughes, who's now my board president, made to the Texas legislature is, you know, we really we have a great plan for our community. We know what we want to do. So just give us the tool so we can do it, as opposed to having to sit there and put in one bond and then hope that prices on land and materials don't rise so much that it completely blows your plan out of the water and you have to go back and revise it and change it. And so this really will allow communities to do everything they need to do in their community one time, as opposed to 3 or 4 times.
Right.
So
And
Deborah,
Libby, if I could just say on that, yeah, and what Ellen and I used to talk about when I went out and saw her community, and we used it as kind of an example of an older mud that really needed closer to something like a 3% or no cap as opposed to 1%, was that you have residents who move in or have been there, and they can almost have their kids raised before the park is in the shape for them to really be able to use it. And that's just unfortunate, you know, and among all the other benefits was that the residents want to use it now. So this provides, and the mud that otherwise was economically completely capable of building the full thing, and just needed to have the bonds to help do it. This now provides them that opportunity to try to get it done while the residents are there to really be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you know, we will see. We're working on a panel. We'll have something at our next conference where we talk about, you know, all these case studies where you can do it faster and what it really means. So for us, I mean, there's a lot of hypothetical, like if we only had 3%, here's what we could do. But one of the things we're looking forward to is being able to really test it out and show the bond issues that we can do. And really, we want to talk about the benefits on the back end as well, because I mean, if you look at, this is Cross Creek Ranch, and this is Fluellen Creek from 2004 before they came in. And, you know, it's, again, this is.
Let me go back.
No, that's perfect. You go.
Okay, up
Yeah,
there.
just back and forth. So you can see, you know, this is capable of carrying a lot more drainage, a lot more safely, and providing a huge amount of community benefit. And that's really what we think that, you know, if you were doing this if you didn't have Parks and Recreations bond, if you go back to the next one, you know, you would have a ditch in the community.
Right.
You wouldn't have the land, basically the natural vegetation that has to be put back in, because you'll notice there aren't a whole lot of trees around there. But what this Parks bond does is it allows you to buy those nice, more mature trees. It allows you to put the oxbows and the other things to slow water down into the channel using geofluvial morphology. And you know, you get those trails. And one thing that's not visible on here, but if you go to Cross Creek Ranch, you'll see it. I mean, there are occasional, you know, benches and, you know, canopies and other amenities. So people really do enjoy this space. So there's a benefit for people. There's an environment. There's a benefit for, you know, the bugs and the bunnies. And you see a lot of nature and native species coming back into suburbs, which we think is a beautiful thing. And again, this doesn't have to be in Greenfield. This, you know, this is actually in Mandolin Gardens. And so it's more of a compact arrangement, but you can retrofit, and there are a number of retrofits that look, you know, substantially like this in different muds throughout the Houston region. And we, you know, we expect to see those in suburbs around Austin and San Antonio as well.
That's great. And I just want to pick up here a little bit more. I already mentioned the third key goal in carbon sequestration, but all of what Augie just said, all benefits carbon sequestration in our region. And as you all know, or likely know, one of the tools in the resilience toolbox for our region is the Resilient Houston Plan, the many goals under that plan, as well as the Climate Action Plan. Both of those plans include the planting of 4.6 million native trees new native trees planted by 2030. Houston Wilderness has been working with a tree strategy implementation group, some of which I see are on this call, and who are basically all the big tree planters in the region. we can reach this goal. It's doable, but we have to have a place to put all these trees, and a lot of these green spaces are the place to do it. And that's how we're going to reach both that goal as well as that important increase generally in our carbon, the carbon absorbed in our soils and our oyster reefs. And the thing is, that's happening worldwide. Of course, we know that's a worldwide effort. But our soils, the vertisol, the alpha sol soils, they really lend themselves to absorbing a lot of carbon. And because of a lot of the different types of land use over the years, we've got lots of carbon we can continue to put back in as carbon stock before our soils are full and can't take any more. So we've got many years to be able to accomplish that. So I've already kind of mentioned that there's major forestation efforts going on all around the region. And we just recognize that 1410 is an opportunity to continue to do that. In fact, I've heard Tricia with Bridgeland say that now that they've got a 3% cap, that's one of the first things they're going to do is they have a tree farm already out west. They're going to look at adding more to that, adding more native trees in all their different communities around the region. You know, now that they have more of the funds to be able to do that, which is exciting. You know, this again just talks a little bit about all the benefits. Were you going to pick up on this one, Augie?
I was, yeah.
Okay, go for it.
And this is where, you know, there's a lot of mud boards that may be saying, well, you know, that sounds kind of good, but what's in it for us? Like, why would we want to do this? And the reason why is if you're a mud, it means that the home values in your community will go up, and so does your property tax by about 5%, just because of the values of the home. So you know, and a park being within 1.5 miles of your house means, or sorry, with I think it's maybe 1,500 feet means that house is, you know, I think up to 15% more valuable. It depends on the location than if you're far away from a park. So basically, and then the other part of this is it substantially reduces your stormwater treatment costs. And so you can offset the cost of infrastructure that you'd have to build in treatment costs in 1 year. So basically, if you do we've seen there are several studies that show if you just go out there and plant trees and native vegetation, it's a fraction of the cost of a similar, you know, kind of gray infrastructure facility. And basically the savings you get off of that investment in landscape more than offsets the cost of building that gray infrastructure just in 1 year. So the other reason is, you know, it's happier residents and then lower spending on crime and public health. I mean, there's a cascading effect that benefits the county as well. There have been a lot of studies showing that, you know, the mental health benefits, helps with community policing. People are out and about. They notice things that they wouldn't notice if they were just in their houses. And also the residents in your community are healthier. So they actually end up costing less for, you know, county healthcare. So actually one of the first presentations like this I saw was from Harris County Public Health. And they had a PhD over there arguing, you know, basically all of our communities need to do more to put in parks in our communities. And so it's nice to be in a position where I can say, yeah, we agree. That's a great idea. And there are a lot of benefits. If you go on to the next slide, that
Sure.
Houston Parks Board has been advocating this for a while. In fact, their Green Bayous 2020 initiative talked about how you would save about $50 million a year on healthcare costs for the county annually. You know, that's for $100 million investment from the county or city in that case. And so, you know, it doesn't take long before your community, whether it's the county or your MUD or the city, end up offsetting the cost of the park and then continue to reap the long-term benefits. And so, you know, basically you can see that just the Bayou Greenways initiative means that 1.9 million people will live within 1.5 miles of the Bayou Greenway. And the Beyond the Bayous program will expand that out, where I think they're looking at adding over 1 million more people through that initiative. And so, you know, we've worked with Deborah's group and Houston Parks Board and a bunch of others on these concepts. And that's where, you know, MUDs can play a really pivotal role, but these
yeah.
MUDs they're all individual government entities, and so it's not a monolithic thing. So for us, really being advocates for our district's best interest is something that we have to do. There are times where it may not be in a district's best interest to participate, but we see those cases very, very limited. In the majority of cases, there is a huge benefit to those MUDs in participating. And that's why I'm here and really happy to see that 14 is passed. And I'm looking forward to seeing what my communities do with it and what Deborah and her group do to make sure that we reach our regional conservation goals.
Yeah, I agree, Augie. It's going to be very interesting to see what all different districts do with that extra amount. And I look forward to having some slides within the next 6 months to a year where I can say, they couldn't do this before, now they can, and all that kind of good stuff. And if I could also just mention that, yeah, you all, I'm sure, noticed trails here. This was literally just a ditch, a large detention basin that was significantly converted by Mary Talley Architects, her firm, and it has trails, right? Cross Creek Ranch, one of the first things you notice, flanked with trails. And in the case of Bridgeland, well, you can't see it here, but believe me, there are trails that go all the way around it. And I don't have a picture of MUD 23 in Fort Bend County, but she was saying it does look a little bit more still like a detention basin, but again, they had to do everything in stages. And the first thing they did was the trail. Now they've come back with trees, so that eventually the trail will be shaded. They've added a playground and those kind of things, but those trails are critical, and we've just all learned how important those are, because you can't really walk around. You've got chiggers and it's wet and it could be muddy, and you can't really walk around these green spaces without a trail system. And so you can combine all those ecosystem services together. And HB 1410 gives these entities a way to do that. And one of the things that was a real selling point, and then I'll stop talking, is I thought at the legislature too was we were just coming off the pandemic. In fact, we were still really in it, right, in January. And what did everybody discover? That those trails were critical. That's how you got outside. That's how you got exercise during the pandemic. If you lived in a community that had a trail somewhere of some kind, it was critical. If you had to walk on the street or around on the sidewalk, fine. But if you could get to a trail, it was a really nice thing because you didn't have a whole lot of places to go. So anyway, that's 1410 and the new law. And there's sites in there if you want to go and see the law and all that good stuff and read, more detail about it. It's in there. And then these are also just websites that could be of help.
Okay, great. Really appreciate it. This gives me a lot of hope about the future of what we're all been trying to do here. It's, at the end of the day, it's all about the money, right? And so we now have at least ways a dent in that thing that was dragging us down. Okay, great. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And we're going to move on now to Justin Bauer. He's going to now talk about HGAC's Regional Conservation Framework. So, Justin, take it.
Hey, Justin, you're muted.
I know. Thank you. Can everyone see my screen now? The presentation? Yes, awesome. Thank you, Tom. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We are incredibly excited about 1410. I've been following that all throughout the legislature. I'm glad we had fantastic partners like Augie and Deborah at the helm on that one. We were a little scared toward the end that it wasn't going to make it all the way through because it was a first-year bill, but we think that's going to make a big difference. And I want to, maybe put that a little more in context, like Deborah did, with some other things that are going on in the region, and specifically a new project here. Well, not a new project, but a new initiative here at HGAC. So we've been involved for many years with various conservation efforts in the region. Obviously, the Gulf Houston Regional Conservation Plan with Houston Wilderness, as well as quite a few others. And have been very excited to see this really take off as a regional concept, as a something that we are looking to more and more as a counterpart to and a supplement to gray infrastructure, and recognizing all the values that the natural areas bring to the region. One thing that, in discussing with some of our partners, including Deborah Houston Wilderness, about where HGAC could potentially add some value to this conversation, other than being sort of a data source and a participant in committees, is looking at what our capacity was in the local government side. So we have a pretty broad range of local governments doing a pretty broad range of things that could generally fall in the concept of conservation. But we wanted to look at where are we at as a region? Where are we at in terms of coordinating those efforts? Where is there a lack of capacity? And so we started a project with the Houston Endowment called, at that point, Regional Conservation Framework, but is now the Regional Conservation Initiative. And I want to talk to you a little bit about where we're at. We're kind of at a milestone, finishing one phase and starting a new phase, and invite you to be part of this, and invite you to give us feedback in whatever manner that happens to come, good, bad, or indifferent. So this is, like I said, this is an ongoing partnership with the Houston Endowment, and we worked with Houston Wilderness closely in our first phase. And we have taken a broader look than maybe some of the other projects that have happened in the past. So we're looking at the full 13 county of the region, and looking at a broader definition of conservation. So there certainly have been a lot of efforts. We're standing on the backs of giants in many ways. But we're looking at, with that lens, with that focus on what our local government capacity is, knowing that we have NGOs and other organizations that are doing fantastic work, and certainly don't, need a lot of us, telling them what to do or how to do it, how we can match that on the local government side. But looking at, so that traditional view of preservation, keeping natural values and natural systems where they are, restoration, putting them back where they have been. But the third and the piece that gets me kind of the most excited sometimes is this concept of enhancement, of adding natural function to places like our built environment, where we don't think of as nature. We think of nature as this place we go to, and not somewhere like Flowing Creek and Cross Creek Ranch, where nature is part of our development, or even going further, looking at things like LID and green infrastructure on single sites, where you're adding natural function, even if it's not nature. So we take a pretty broad view of conservation because we wanted to encapsulate all those things that our member governments do or could do, that aren't just part of a traditional focus on conservation, putting a whole lot of value on that, but also saying, hey, look, if you're a small government, you're saying, well, I can't really build a new park, or I can't really set aside these wetlands. There are things you can do within the sphere of what you're doing in your operations that we're saying fall under this concept of adding natural function back to our communities. And so this has really been the basis of HGAC being involved a little more formally in conservation efforts moving forward. Just to make it clear, we don't see ourselves as the conservation experts by any means. We're here to support the fantastic work that's being done by our NGOs, to help our local governments, to do what kind of is usually in HGAC's wheelhouse, which is, to facilitate, coordinate, do, matchmaking for resources, getting things coordinated on a more regional basis. So in our first phase, we had a chance to sit down with a lot of local governments throughout the 13 counties. So we had a meeting for each county. There was a couple where we lumped them together for smaller audiences. But to really sit down and dig into what's going on in that county, what the key resources are, but more importantly, to start talking about where our local governments are using conservation and sort of why they're using conservation practices, what's driving them. Is it an economic driver? Is it flood mitigation? And just as importantly, why are they not, and what are the roadblocks? So we could start to piece together where there's capacity needed, where there's resources needed, and kind of most importantly, while we've got people around the table talking, where there were opportunities for partnerships, where we had, a couple different entities in maybe the same county or the same watershed who are saying, yeah, we really would love to do more with reforestation along our riparian corridor or whatever it may be. Okay, there's the potential for, sort of a facilitation of a larger project. So, that was a large focus of that first phase, was putting together these shared priorities, all the listening session data, but also doing a lot of technical work on the back end. So we came up with some spatial tools. There's some funding and some model resources and guides. All that's on the website, link that at the end. Just a lot of that sort of value added stuff, but things that hopefully would, impact and enable some of our, especially some of our smaller governments, to do some of this or be able to move into this sphere of looking at natural resources and natural function in their operations in the same way that, say a city of Houston can do. We've had so much fun working with some of our colleagues in the city of Houston on things like urban forestry, and they have just a tremendous capacity and a tremendous staff capacity to do that. Whereas some of our smaller communities, just may not have specialized staff to fill each one of those roles and may not have the technical or resource capacity. And that's where we thought, this is somewhere HGAC can follow our traditional role and potentially add some of that capacity or help engender some of that capacity. Sort of the big takeaways from that first phase, which was really sort of that visioning, building the tools, building the relationships. There is definitely interest. And I think we were surprised to see how much interest there was on behalf of our local governments. We knew folks were going to be interested in things like flood mitigation. It's hard to have any sort of natural function conversation without that really dominating and justifiably so. But there was a lot of interest in things like parks, especially having been doing this during the pandemic. Everyone was seeing a huge influx of people, suddenly going out into the world and going to parks because they couldn't go to indoor activities. And obviously there just was so much more attention being paid to the recreational venues of the area. But and even though habitat and biodiversity maybe wasn't the biggest focus, I think that still was there in things like ecotourism interest, fisheries, things like even just preserving the natural character of some of our rural communities. These were all things that we didn't send out there as, hey, do you agree with this? These are things that our communities brought to us as, hey, this is what's important to us. So we're kind of surprised by the sheer level of interest, and that really let us know, okay, there is a niche here. There is the potential for us to continue this conversation and continue maybe the support. Unsurprisingly, like I said, there's a mixed capacity. We had folks like City of Houston, Harris County doing, a lot of big ticket, large landscape level projects, flood control plans. Gosh, Glenn, you could, you or Nick Griffin or folks could tell me, how many tens of thousands trees you plant every year, but you're doing things at scale, as compared to some of our smaller organizations who just don't have that staff, don't have those resources, and don't have that economy of scale. And I think one thing that became very clear is a lot of our member governments said, one of the things that we really could use support and we could use more capacity is making some of these arguments to our citizens, making the argument of why, for a district or a small community, 1410 or similar funding mechanisms, green bonds in general, make sense to a community. If you're looking at it from a dollar and cents, it's not just, oh, they're pretty trees, which is going to sucker me into it, but for someone else, saying, okay, you're avoiding this much in flood damage, or having to mitigate that function, stormwater infrastructure downstream. This is a dollar and cents argument, and that really came out as something that our local governments really wanted more support. And they said, we think, there's a lot of this stuff that we'd like to do. There's a lot of these conservation practices we'd really like to be moving toward. For a lot of reasons, one of the problems we have is political will, both in the decision maker side of things, but a lot on the public side of things, the public being willing to fund things and making that valuation. All of us who have been sitting around the table talking about conservation for years and years and years, many, folks much more valuable to that conversation than I, have been talking about ecosystem services values since that was the new jargon. It's old news now, but it's not something that's necessarily breaking through the threshold for the public mindset in the same way I think as it does for those of us who work with it on a more daily basis. So being able to make that argument, having the data and the valuation to do that, it was something our local government said, this is really what we want HGC to help provide us with. So moving out of that phase one, wrapping your arms around a whole region of a really diverse set of ecosystems and a lot of potential things, you really are wrapping your arms around the world. There's a lot of stuff you could potentially do. So we went back and we looked at what we heard from member governments in terms of things that just, there was a lot of interest that overlapped on. Urban forests and treescapes, that was almost a no-brainer. There's so much going on with the 4.6 million trees. I've been excited to sit in with the TSIG and Deborah, just see the amazing amount of effort and work going on there. That is something that's an easy sell to people. Trees are visible. They're very, they break through that threshold of attention very well. And there's something that just, I know Mac Martin is or was on the call, and he and I have been sitting down and working on some really cool stuff in the Cypress Creek watershed. He's, put together some really great corporate sustainability projects looking at, not only the sort of the aesthetic benefits of trees, but really there's a functional benefit. There is a stormwater benefit. There's water quality benefit. There's just innumerous benefits to trees in the riparian areas. So that seemed like something that, look, we can really start to move forward on a regional basis. We've had a lot of success in the past with our greenway systems, Bayou Greenway, Spring Creek Greenway, Cypress Creek Greenway. These are big jewels of our park system, but we're a big region, and there's an ample opportunity to extend this system out, to bring this sort of, especially in riparian areas, these protective areas where you're getting people in touch with these natural systems. At the same time, you're helping to preserve some of the system and some of the areas that would impact, like our waterways, and looking at how we connect that with things like rails to trails and some of these other existing sort of greenway or trail systems, where you really can start to look at this more on a regional basis and really start to grow that out and make it a regional thing, something that is a benefit to a region, that is connected, that is not just bits and pieces here and there, as impressive as some of those bits and pieces are. And another thing, as we started to talk about, what was the character that our local governments were really trying to accent for their area? They're really trying to either preserve or to emphasize to visitors. And obviously ecotourism is a not small part of our local economy. And so we talked about the concept of signature projects, working with either each county or, whether it's a watershed or some large division, to say, okay, this for your area is something, your county can get behind. The communities all say, this is just a focus of our area. This is a jewel. This is a piece that we really want to build our message, our vision, our character around, and looking to do some partnerships, some grant matchmaking, some facilitation, to hopefully move some resources to get some of these big signature projects, not just for the value of the projects themselves, but because they serve as an anchor. They serve as a way to say, look, this is a big visible pilot of what can be done. It's not always going to be at the scale, but look, we can put this sort of partnership together. We can make this attractive to grantors. We can do this at smaller scales within your communities as well. So to really be a leader for conservation on a larger scale by starting with these big nucleus sort of projects. In terms of what H-GAC kind of saw as its focus areas moving forward, in terms of what we wanted to do internally, how we could support this effort, we work in a lot of sort of large existing planning venues, with flood mitigation with a regional flood management committee, water quality with, we're the Clean Rivers program managing partner. We do a lot of the watershed planning in the area, transportation, obviously, not to bury the lead, but, our TIP and our RTP, we have a very large federal dollars presence and planning role as the municipal planning organization for the 8 county, as well as, what we do for our extended 13 county region. And we also have a very strong economic development presence and a lot of great partners on that. We have all these large scale planning processes. And so one of the first things we want to do is to look and start to move some of these conservation considerations to be a functional part of some of these processes, whether that means, as we've already done, looking at things like our ecological project on the transportation side, where, we're going to do ecological assessment, at least on a base level, a sort of a real prioritization level as part of our project prioritization. This isn't just something we're doing and it's a nice book report on a shelf. This is something that, is going to move projects, that is going to change the way we do some of this big planning. So things like that, looking at where we can sort of tie these adjacent spheres of projects together, where we can bring conservation in as a functional, leveraged practice, as a consideration to some of these big planning things that we're already involved in, that we're already kind of in that leadership role. The support piece, I think, is really where the rubber is going to hit the road for the next couple of years. Some of this leverage stuff is longer term, is building this foundation and institution for the future. We want to get out there and do what we do best. So build partnerships, facilitate, some of these conversations, get so-and-so talking to so-and-so. Like I said, Mac Martin from Texas Forest Service, and I've had the pleasure of working on his project. And, the other day I said, just a very small example, hey, Mac, we really should talk to Alan Steinberg at West Houston Association. He knows a lot of people. It's a great organization. They have a lot of good corporate contacts. And we had that conversation, and it's great, and it's up and it's running. That's the sort of thing I think that, HGAC can do, and not, step on toes of folks who are conservation experts. Technical services, we've always been a big data clearinghouse. We want to continue to develop more data, to look where we have, the potential for local governments to use data in a meaningful way in their planning practices, and help them supply and develop that data. And again, I talked about that messaging component before. Obviously we have a pretty well-developed public outreach wing. I think even beyond sort of stock things like putting together passive resources, model resources that people could use for outreach campaigns, but working with our partners one-on-one to help them do some of that valuation and say, okay, you're trying to get this green bond passed. Let's look at the numbers. Let's help you make that economic case that you think will be important to your residents, or let us help you figure out maybe what is the selling point for your residents, and help support you if maybe you don't have the staff and capacity to do that yourselves. And sort of, I think what a lot of ears prick up when we say, on the last piece is the funding. Looking at on our own side, putting together a priority list of, here's some projects where HGAC thinks we can make a big difference, and putting a lot of staff hours at that. I wish I could come on and say, hey, we've got millions of dollars in grants to hand out. We don't. What we do have is a capacity for the next couple of years to commit some solid staff time and technical resources on our side. So that's essentially us working very directly, instead of, as this part of this project, working specifically to support our local governments with things like identifying grant resources, helping with proposals, helping put together coalitions around a grant package. And then maybe a little further out, looking at, well, what can we put together that are sort of new approaches? Can we start to look at 1410 just got passed. What does that mean for our districts? How do we build that into this bigger, broader thing? Do we need to look at sort of more innovative funding strategies? Is there room for some sort of district, or looking at how we expand capacity as a region for funding to try and get us beyond just, a 2-year HGAC involvement, a 3-year HGAC involvement, to building something like, our transportation funding, where we have an ongoing sustainable project, a sustainable process where we can keep that money flowing and keep that continuity going. I mentioned before, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, I'd be happy to talk one-on-one. We have developed a lot of other resources and tools around that. We got so excited in the first part of this project, especially when me and the data guys got together, like, well, what if we did this? What if we had this sort of map? So we have a sort of an a conservation planning map. It's an online GIS where you can do some project prioritization and do some queries, and it's really cool. We put together sort of model projects, things we thought were really good examples. If you were a local community looking to do something with flood mitigation, here's some examples. Here's some, here's how it was funded. Here's how the coalition was put together, that you can kind of look to as templates. We put together a funding toolbox, really cool funding sort of grant identifier, where you can go on and it's interactive, and you say, I'm interested in these sort of things. I am this sort of entity. I'm interested in these sort of grant sources, and it will select a list for you. Here's some potential grant resources. If some of those look good, talk to us. Let's see what we can do to put together a proposal. And that was what I was just talking about. Should have advanced the slide. But just to give you an example, this is all online. It's all in our conservation website. But to give you an idea, so I'm interested, I'm a coastal area. I want to look at, what resources there are for recreation sort of based stuff. And I'm looking at federal and state, or I'm only interested in state. And it'll bring up some resources, how you can follow through those. And then kind of the next step is to contact us, and we help you from there. And this is an example of our conservation map. So this is an online mapping system. You can designate your own area, and it'll run statistics for you. There's this much forest in there, this much so-and-so, and you can then go further and run reports and queries and say, show me all the parcels of forests that are bigger than so many acres in this area. And if I was, for instance, was wanting to do to do some acquisition, I could look at an area and say, show me all the really big cohesive parcels, and you start to use that as your initial step in prioritization. So the write-up of that framework that we put together is available on our website. But again, this is really our starting point. This is us assessing where we add value and how we do that. And we've just kicked off the second phase where we're hopefully going to do that. We're going to get out there. We've already started to work, with folks like MAC and City of Houston on a couple of projects. And we really want to just get some stuff on the ground and support folks as much as we can. So I know I'm sounding like the cheerleader, but we're at that stage of the project where I'm excited. I hope I can get you excited about it, because we really, we have a window where there's just a lot of things overlapping. There's flood money coming in from various sources. There's just a momentum, I think, happening where we can get things on the ground if we jump on it now. So I said this is a 2-year effort. We're not stopping our involvement after 2 years. It just means we have a lot of capacity, staff and technical capacity within that 2 years that we really want to focus and dig deep and get things in place to go forward from there. And one of the things we're going to be talking with the broader NRAC group is, as we're starting to talk through those things, one of the things we want to do with NRAC is expand its role to really be a guiding force for this. Because we recognize I'm not the conservation expert. I'm conservation adjacent on a lot of things. And I can talk the talk, and I love the stuff. But I am not an urban forester. I am not, a wetland biologist. I am not, even I come from a municipal background, but I'm not currently municipal government. We need all those perspectives to help us guide this. So it's not just us doing this as a black box. We really are going to rely on the expertise. Because again, we're here as a support function, and we need the expert guidance to tell us, we're here, you point us in the right direction, and tell us how high to jump, and we're heading that way. I talked a little bit about it, but just kind of to wrap up, again, we're recognizing this is not happening in a vacuum. Deborah's group is established. I've been excited to be part of that group for a long time now. There are a lot of fantastic efforts going on. Katy Prairie Conservancy just got a fantastic grant from NRCS to do coastal prairie work. We work with a lot of partners who are doing fantastic work. We are here to supplement, especially on the local government side, where we think there's a lot of opportunity, but not to come in and be the top dog telling other people what their priorities should be. We are here to support. Support existing, but to spur new, to look where we can go beyond what's going on and really start to do some things on a more coordinated partnership sort of basis. Like I said, our end goal here is to set up something that has long-term continuity, to really do the same thing that Deborah's done with the plan for this broader kind of focus, this broader area, and hopefully with some of the financial push and build into some of our planning processes that we can bring. So I know I've been rambling on this for a while now. I'll end this. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have, but I would love to have some conversations one-on-one to talk about maybe what your organization is thinking about, where we might be able to help you short-term, and kind of maybe where we can guide this long-term. So thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Moving on. I guess we're running, I think, relatively okay. Want to move on now to talk about the Pna Awards and Recognition, and where we are in the cycle, and the things that staff and I have been working on when nobody was looking, as it were. So if we can get back into the main, there we are. Okay, so we're starting, what you're looking at here is what is ahead of us from this moment to the end of the cycle. And this being July, what we're here to do, and we want to go through this fairly quickly today, just so everybody understands what is being contemplated. Because as we've been trying to do, a lot of this is going to be discussed and decided over email between now and the end of the month. What we're going to be doing today is looking over some things that we've been playing with about ways to improve the application and the process, particularly the application itself. And also to begin the process of finding the judges. And as you can see from the rest of it, we have a drum beat that will just keep going one thing after another all the way to early next year when we advertise and finally have the recognition event and the somewhere in the first 2 months of 2022. Okay, next slide. Now, here's the big word, streamline. This is what we're going to be talking about here very briefly. Having been in this for a number of years and working with the staff, one of the things that we've sort of always noticed and scratched our head about in the past was it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger and a little more complicated every year, and we want to streamline this thing so that it's a little less confusing, a little more to the point. And so the two things that we're looking at streamlining are the categories themselves and also the questions that will be put to the entities who are going to be submitting applications for the rewards. One of the things right off the bat is going to be the combination. And we're proposing to combine the planning and policy tool categories. And part of it is the policy tools thing out of, I think, we've been at this for 15 years. We've had 223 awards applicants during that time. And only 15 have been for policy tools, and none of those since 2017. So what we want to do is sort of conflate those two, and then to look at some questions that we have come to believe are really quite redundant, and conflate some of those. And this is going to make it really easier for everybody involved, from the applicants to the judges. So we're proposing to go from 14 scoreable questions to 10 now. Okay, next slide. So in terms of one of the things that we're going to be looking at doing here is adjusting the weights. We had gotten to the point where we had weights that ranged from 1 to 20 on the categories, and it just didn't seem for a lot of people to really be working. Yeah, some questions should be worth more, but not in such an exaggerated fashion. So there are some things that we've just got to get them closer together, and that's what we're trying to do. Next slide. All right, now here we go. This has to do with the questions for the current Pna Awards and Recognition that have to do with the categories that we're currently dealing in. And as you can see, we've added the two highlighted ones are actually now 2 or more questions being pushed together in a sort of and/or, either/or, all of the above way of dealing with it, depending on the nature of what is being submitted. And as you can see, our range is, we got 3 1s, a couple of 2s, a 3, a couple of 4s, and a couple of 5s. And so we think that is going to make things a lot easier and probably a lot more fair to particularly some of the smaller entities and smaller projects that are being submitted. Okay, next slide. And now that we've shoved two together, we're wanting to talk about a programming category to add into it. And again, this is aimed for probably smaller communities that aren't set up at this time to be able to do a lot of planning or building. They're just trying to use what they've already got to the fullest extent possible. And to help them with adding programming, which is where a lot of the rubber meets the road when we're talking about parks and open space. We're saying that this programming category, but still must have an environmental focus, not just concerts and fireworks, but things like hands-on or awareness building programs. So a little bit of all of the above is what's going to help get better scores on some of these proposals. Okay, next. And so now with the programming category in place, this one is going to have a slightly different set of questions and a slightly different mix of weightings. Again, we're really trying to get it focused and streamlined here for the process before us. Let's see, what's the next slide? Okay, so where we are now is, and like I said earlier, because of the way we do things, we don't want to get into a big discussion today, particularly not with 55 people here, on the new proposals. You've got the handouts that contains the information that you just saw here in a kind of briefer form. We want you to look those over. If you've got any comments or concerns, please email the staff, and we will continue to massage this until everybody feels comfortable with it. At the same time, the time has come, and for everybody that's listening, we've got to choose some judges. And these judges are going to need to come from 5 different categories. There will be 5, should be 5. We need someone from academia that is related to this whole big parks and natural areas arena. We want someone that's a consultant in that arena, someone that was a past winner. Someone that is specifically a water quality expert. And then we've got the good old wild card. Can be all of the above or something not related, but somebody that we feel can bring a good perspective on judging these applications. So that's what we're looking to come away by the end of the month with these things checked off and ready to go in August to begin advertising the fact that this is coming. Get ready to submit your projects. I think that is what I need to convey to everyone. And
Yes.
yeah.
I was saying, yes, I'll send out the information about the proposed change for the awards.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Andrea Tantillo. I'm with
Right.
HGAC. You can't see me, you can only hear me. But some people may not have met me. It's been 1.5 years since we've been anywhere. But
oh yeah.
I just want to let you know that when I send out the follow-up, I'll put the information about the proposed changes to the awards and the call out for judges in that email so everybody can respond to me and we can get together about that. Also, I just had someone private message me that they would like to be a judge, so I'm more than happy to receive private messages like that.
Oh yeah, we love volunteers. Okay. Well now, okay, and this is a reminder to everybody, Monday, September the 13th, once again on Zoom, until we know otherwise. And with the Delta variant, a big who knows out there, stay tuned. We don't know how long before we'll get together face to face. But yeah, put that on your calendar. Same time frame, 1:30 to 3:30 on September the 13th. And please weigh in. Okay, and now it's time for the roundtable discussion. And I'm going to depend on Andrea to ride herd on this because I have got to, something's going on that I got to scoot out for. So this has been a very good meeting as far as I'm concerned, and we'll have more like it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. So the way these meetings usually end is that everyone goes around the room, but today we're going to go around the Zoom, and we're going to just tell us what you've got going on for like maybe a minute or so. I'm going to just go down the list so that there's not chaos and just read your name. And if you've got something going on, let me know. If I mispronounce your name, I apologize in advance. If you can see my name, that gets mispronounced all the time. So I do appreciate you wanting your name pronounced right, but I may mess it up. So first on my list, that's not alphabetical at all, is Tom Douglas.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. I just put onto the chat that on the 22nd of July, the Houston Parks Board Lunch and Learn series will have a special program on Explore Nature on Houston paddling trails. And that'll have a lot of photos of the bayous and recreational use of them.
Thank you, Tom. Next up is Pastor Deb.
Oh, good afternoon, and thank you. We're over here in Northline, sort of in an undeveloped area. So we're going to be Super Neighborhood 45 with Go Neighborhood Northline. So I'm just listening in, listen, learn, and share, just listening to what's going on. We don't have green space here. We're park deficient. And so we're working with Precinct 2 and HPARD with some ideas for starting a hike and bike a trail in a blank land behind a school. So I'm just paying attention, and thank y'all all for all this presentation, and I'm taking a lot of notes.
Well, thank you, and keep us posted on how that trail development goes. So that's very interesting to be able to put a park where you're park deficient. Next up is Tracy Timpanero. Tracy, it looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Okay, go on, Andrea.
Well, I could hear you now.
Oh, that's probably a technical error, user error on my part. I'm Tracy Timpanero. I'm with Interstate Muds Rick Reichs Park in Katy, Texas. We have 8.5 acres, and we were built in 2009. We've been working with some Eagle Scouts on some exciting projects for the park, including a Monarch Way Station. We're working on lighting for our bridge. We just redid our spring planting, and in a very exciting piece of news, we are redoing the lids on all of our trash cans so we get less water in our trash cans, because lately with all the rain, that's been a little bit of a problem. If anyone needs any trash can expertise, I'm your expert now.
Outstanding. I'm writing that down just in case anybody gives us a call. All right, next is Bill Burhans.
Thank you, Andrea. This is Bill Burhans, and I'm representing Willow Waterhole Green Space Conservancy, participating what I expect to be the first time in a long time. And We have a lot going out there, and I would like to invite anybody who would want to have a tour to see what's happening out there. You can find me through willowwaterhole.org, and would love to have people join me on a tour.
Thank you, Bill. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too much, but I think we might hear more from Bill at our September meeting. Is that right?
Yes, I signed up for that. And on a related note, Glenn Laird is one of the fathers of Willow Waterhole. And so he can help us in that presentation and talk about some of the early years. And I'll bring you up to date on some of the things that have been happening more recently.
Awesome. So we're signing him up too. Thank you, Mr. Burhans. Next up is Douglas Mangum.
Hi, this is Douglas Mangum with More Archaeological Consulting, and we're doing our usual part on the consulting side to help organizations develop some of these plans and get them to completion by helping them conform with the Section 106 laws and the Texas Antiquities Code.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Kirk Jackson.
Yes, my name is Kirk Jackson. I work with Healthy Outdoor Communities with Kelly Burnett and Jennifer Bowley, and we are involved with a couple of projects, inner city projects in Third Ward and Acres Home, that I would like to make you all aware of. One is a newly created park that's in Third Ward on Anita Street, 3602, I think is the name. Excuse me, is the address. And we're working with a number of parks in green spaces in Acres Home. If any of you all are familiar with that area, you know that it is a very large area that has a lot of green spaces and waterways and also trails that have gone neglected over the years. So we're in the business of trying to revive those parks and green spaces and make them more accessible, using a word that I use often because I also work as a community engagement specialist for Link Houston, and accessibility to these areas is another tenet of my involvement with these organizations. So I just wanted to mention those. If you have time or if you are in the area, stop by and see some of our work. The new park in Third Ward, I mentioned, and also we created a chess park in the middle of Third Ward on McGowan that is very interesting. It's a pocket park, if you will, that has chess boards on the picnic tables. It has a garden and some other attractive things that kind of revitalized that corner and got rid of some of the bad elements that were there. And so that's all. I won't speak too long.
Well, thank you, Kirk. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you back at our next meeting. And keep in mind that those new parks would probably be eligible to apply for our Parks and Natural Areas Awards when the application opens at the end of September. So be on the lookout for that.
I will. And it's a pleasure meeting everybody or seeing everybody.
Those of us that let you see us, yes.
Right.
So up next is Michael Burku.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's been a very interesting meeting. I'm with Houston One Voice, and our nonprofit has just finished a study for Rufino Hills, and you can read the report on our HoustonOneVoice.org. But this is a 175-acre landfill that could have a very significant impact on water retention, as well as a transformational economic project and park space along the bayou trails, and in itself in the Sharpstown, Beltway 8, West Belford area. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That just reminds me, if anybody has anything that you want to share in the chat, like a link that you want me to share out with everybody, feel free to put that in the chat right now and I'll capture that and make sure everybody gets it, like that HoustonOneVoice.com.org. I'll make sure everybody gets that. Next up is Ed Pettit.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ed Pettit. I actually worked very closely with Kirk, so he took a lot of the updates that I could have given. But I'll add a couple interesting tidbits. So the new park in University Village that he mentioned is actually formerly a city-owned lot that was owned by the Houston Public Works Department that they didn't realize they owned for about 30 years until we did some detective work. And we were able to reclaim that lot and transfer to the Parks Department in a 2-year process that went all the way up to the mayor. So if anyone wants to write a case study about parks development when you have to transfer property between 2 city departments, I can help you write that case study. And the chess park he mentioned is actually a privately owned lot that was done as a tactical urbanism project that's really grown much larger than we ever thought. It now has a little free library, and the gardening that we're doing with Kirk and his team is actually in the process of being certified as a monarch way station. So we added lots of Texas native pollinator plants and milkweeds, and we're in the process of getting that certified. And I was out there yesterday and we had tons of monarchs and other insects buzzing around, so it's working. One other update I have is I'm currently a PhD student at Texas Southern in urban planning and environmental policy, and I just joined the new Bullard Center for Environmental and Climate Justice as a graduate research assistant. And one of the areas that they're really keen on is developing action toolkits around parks equity, mental health, and green space. And so I have a feeling that I'll be giving more updates in the future.
Hey, definitely looking forward to that. Thank you for joining us. And this is like not your first time here, so thank you for coming back and joining us again. So next up is Russell. I'm not even gonna try it. Russell. I think you're muted. Okay, we'll come back to Russell. Next is Frank Blake.
Yes, I'm a volunteer with the Houston Sierra Club. I participated today to keep up to date with the various green space efforts in the area. Something I'd like to mention is that just this past week, we had a program on the city's heat island study with Jamie Gonzalez of the Texas Nature Conservancy. And I found that to be a very compelling program, and I hadn't really considered the importance of addressing future heat impacts on our resident population, our biodiversity, et cetera. So the goals in terms of addressing heat island effects dovetail very well with all of the area green space efforts, with a special emphasis on protecting and enhancing the tree canopy in the developed portions of the city, because the heat island effects are most pronounced where you have great concentrations of pavement, roadways, development, and that sort of thing. So that's going to be very important in the future. If we can sort of re-engineer large parking areas to accommodate more green canopy, porous pavement, and that sort of thing, that will go a considerable way in addressing some of these impacts. So thanks.
Hey, thank you for mentioning that. I see that Pastor Deb mentioned that they're using Hgac and Jaime's work with the heat mapping to discuss tree preservation at an upcoming meeting. And I know that I wish some of our speakers were still here, because I believe heat island is a pretty big component to all those conservation plans. So thank you for bringing that up. All right, Russell, you ready? Okay, we'll move on to Jim Robertson. Mr. Robertson. Danielle Ciosi.
I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear
Oh
me?
yeah, okay. Yes, sir.
I'm on the phone. I'm with the Cypress Creek Flood Control Coalition and the Cypress Creek Greenway Project. Just mentioned kind of a high level thing that we have been working on and continuing to do. As we have worked for years for preservation along the Cypress Creek corridor, or the Cypress Creek Greenway, we're really working and trying to raise the awareness of a proper balance between preservation, public access, and detention. Flood control is adding more detention along Cypress Creek, which we're really pleased to see from the flooding perspective. But as we've worked preserving areas, in some areas there's just been extensive trail development without any consideration for the effect on wildlife habitat and refuge. And so as areas are developed, I think it's always important to keep it on our radar that we make sure that we are preserving the corridor and not doing so much public access that it degrades the habitat and refuge. Just an awareness message. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I remember you saying something similar, that we love nature, but we have to be careful that we don't just love it to death. So we have to make sure that we love it in a reasonable and contained kind of manner, that we are able to continue to love it because we're not stepping all over it.
Yeah, you know, as we are developing and trying to preserve areas in an urban area, we have fewer and fewer acres to preserve. And those acres that we can preserve, we really need to think very carefully about how they're situated relative to continuity and access to the creek and things like that. And we don't want to love them to death.
Thank you. Next we have Danielle Ciosi. Okay. Did I miss anybody, or does anybody else have anything they want to add? It's okay if you don't. We did have 55 people registered, and we had 40 people here at one point, but we are down to 15. So I guess that we are the ones who are hanging on to the end of the meeting. So I do appreciate that from you guys. Also, I wanted to let you know that an event coming up later this month at H-GAC, it's going to be on Zoom, but it's our Bringing Back Main Street. It's going to be on Tuesday, July 27th, and we're going to be talking about how local food fuels your economy. And we're focusing on food trucks and farmers markets. And our featured city will be Tomball, but we're going to have time for a roundtable at the end where we hope that other communities will share their experiences with food-driven parks or events. And I'll put a link to that in the chat.
Thanks, Andrea. That's wonderful.
Thank you. And I think with that...
Andrea?
Yes.
This is Jim Robertson. Just one comment. I appreciated Glenn's comments and what you're doing to revise the nomination process for the awards. And that one piece about redundancy, I think, is important, because I know as I've filled these out in the past, that redundancy thing can be onerous. And so that's great work that you're doing, and thank you for doing that.
Well, you can thank Tracy Tipanero for that. She was a judge last year, and she's like, you got to do something about those questions that you're asking the people to answer the same question over and over again.
Yeah, no, that's
hard to answer,
great.
hard to judge. So
that's good feedback, and thank you for working on that.
So anybody else?
Andrea, will the things from the chat box, will those be sent out, or do we need to capture those for ourselves individually?
Oh no, I'll send those out. I mean, feel free to capture them. I'm not going to just end this meeting immediately, but I'll send it all out to everybody after, probably in the next day or two.
Thanks.
Good meeting, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had one other question for you, and it's just about all of your meetings at Houston-Galveston. I've been to a couple. I gave some testimony at one of the board meetings. We're doing a hybrid workspace project. Are all of the meetings that when people go back after COVID going to all be on person, or are some of these meetings going to remain in a hybrid or a way for people to at least call in? I've got some people we're technology deprived over here, but we're catching up. And so we're just now starting out. A lot of people over here are old and disabled, and like me, I don't get out. I'm a homebound person. But I'm just curious, while I'm putting this out to my community members, are there going to be meetings online, do you think, or is it going to be mostly in person?
I think that for the foreseeable future, we're going to have online or at least hybrid as we transition back. I believe that there's some meetings that are required by the state to have at least one person in the facility, and then everybody else could be online. I would encourage you, if you want to see us to keep the meetings hybrid, we like them. We're probably going to lobby for that too. But if anybody from the community would like to see us continue at least hybrid meetings, I would welcome or encourage you to go ahead and let them know. If your testimony, or just to let somebody know, I'm not a decision maker, but I will pass that on. So if you want to,
yeah, that's a really good suggestion, because a lot of times so many people, we've been so cooped up, everybody wants to get out. We're not even opening our church back up till after Labor Day, just because all the start and stops are too hard. So I think it's going to be a wait and see with some of the variants. We have a low vaccine rate over here in this barrios. A lot of people aren't wanting to get out. We're still pushing, work on that. Okay. Thank you so much. And thanks all of y'all for your indulgence, and I appreciate it.
Oh no, thank you. That's a good question. I wish we had the magic answer. So. Okay. I guess since Glenn left, I'm the one who can adjourn this meeting. So without any objection, and this is a voting kind of body, I'm going to, Tom, are you waving goodbye, or are you waving your hand? You want to say something? Bye. Okay, so since we're not a voting board, we don't need to vote on this. So consider this meeting adjourned. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Hope to see you again soon.
So Wendy, I think that's it. I'm going to end this meeting now.
Okay, good meeting.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you know what? I think it was good. Everybody, we don't need to be recording.